Hey y'all, my name is Angelica Rubio, State Representative for District 35 here in Las Cruces, and this is just a legislative update. Happy New Year! The session starts in a few weeks, and that means that I will be leaving the desert and my favorite place, which is my little house with my dog, to Santa Fe for 60 days. As I've mentioned in previous videos, 60-day session is a long time. It's 2 months, of course, but it's 60 days of ongoing introduction of legislation, trying to get a budget passed that is a constitutional requirement, and passing really important legislation, which is incredibly important this year, especially for pieces of work that we're all looking to pass to help support communities, especially as we head into this new era of federal politics that will pretty much dictate a lot of what needs to happen, will happen, etc. Over the course of the next few weeks, I will be updating you all on specific pieces of legislation that I will be introducing, but also packages of legislation that a collective of us will be introducing, mostly around housing. You'll see I'll be talking more about housing, as well as issues related to a number of other budget related items that are important to not just my district here in Las Cruces, but for the rest of the state. Historically, if you have followed me and this journey that I've been on for the last 8 years with the New Mexico State Legislature, I tend to look at things from a statewide perspective, for sure, and not just specific to Las Cruces. For some, that has been something that people get really upset about because they're like, you should be focused solely on Las Cruces and your district. But I will say that when it comes to the budget specifically, we have this process called capital outlay. And capital outlay is a very inequitable process that the state goes through, where we just distribute every House member, every Senate member gets the same amount of money, that gets allocated the same amount of funds that everybody else does. So if there is a House member, for example, who covers like 5 counties, maybe not as many people, but maybe it's a much more rural area with a lot of infrastructure issues. Perhaps there are communities that don't have good access to quality water, for example. And here I oversee a very dense district in the second largest city of the state, and perhaps there's issues that we have with like infrastructure and housing. Like, I am going to get the same amount of money that the person who is dealing with all of those counties is going to get. It's seen as an equal thing, but it's very, in my opinion, very inequitable. And so as we get closer to passing a budget, and I'll talk about this as we get closer to that time, is that we will all be allocated a certain amount, which in this case, because we will have a surplus, it'll likely be in the millions of dollars that each of us will get an allocated amount of money. And we will have to decide over the course of like 72 hours how we're going to allocate that money to our local communities and our districts. And I share all of this because it's important to understand that in addition to passing an overall budget, we also have to consider capital outlay. And capital outlay gives me so much anxiety because we're essentially all trying to fund things that beat out other projects because people know how to, like, they understand the system. And so there will be things that we don't fund because things were likely not part of this capital outlay process. And so I'm going to be sharing more and more of that as the weeks come closer to the session and as we're like in it, so that you can see firsthand like what projects were brought to me as something that should be funded. And then you can also be thinking about like, why wasn't this stuff funded? And it's because if your county or your city did not see this as a priority, it was probably likely that this thing wasn't a part of the process in the first place. And there needs to be a better way of ensuring that the public gets to be more a part of this process, which we have been trying really hard over the course of the last couple of years. I know Senator Hamlin and I have been sponsoring some informative forums over the course of the summers, just so that people can have a better understanding of how capital outlay works. But not everybody has access to that. We have issues with this thing called anti-donation clause, so it makes it harder for us to get money to communities. All of this is part of that process. And so I will be talking more and more about that as the days get closer to us passing a budget. I will say that I'm dreading the session, if I'm being perfectly honest. 60 days away from home is a long time. But on top of just dealing with sort of like the federal impact of the new administration coming in, there's just a lot going on statewide politically that is just not going to make this session any better. You're going to see a lot of that come up through conversations around public safety, where Democrats are going to be taking some votes that are not in alignment with my values as someone who believes that we should be making investments in housing and education and all of the really key pieces that I believe contribute to a better community. And because people are always thinking about their elections, things are going to be really, really interesting around that issue. So needless to say, that is what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks as we head to session and we start doing this thing that we call the legislature. And so hopefully you'll come along. So with that, I will leave you all. I'll update you all as drafting of our legislation starts to get finalized. And yesterday was the first day that you could introduce legislation. But drafting is so behind right now that even my bills aren't completely done. So I'll have to give you a crash course on bill introduction and all that stuff maybe next week. So with that, thank you all. Talk soon. Happy New Year.